Yes, so welcome back to the Probability in the City seminar. Today we're very happy to have Jean-Francois Legault, who will tell us about compact and non-compact models of random geometry. And as always, feel free to ask questions in the chat, or you can also unmute yourself and ask your question verbally. So Jean-Francois, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. First, I would like to thank the organizers for this invitation. So it's the first time that I give a lecture with this modern technology. So I hope it will not be too bad, and you can interrupt me if you want to ask questions. Okay, so I want to talk about models of random geometry, which are obtained as limits of discrete random graphs drawn on the sphere. And I want to emphasize maybe both kinds of models, compact and non-compact ones. And especially for the non-compact part, most of what I'm going to say is joint work with Armand Riera, who is a PhD student here in Paris. So what's the goal of the lecture is, well, basically it's to describe how we can construct basic models of random geometry from random trees equipped with Brownian labels. And I will try to explain that it's always the same kind of construction. You can really have a unified approach to all these models. Okay? And the models I'm going to consider, well, of course, the first one, compact model known as the Brownian map. Here, I prefer to call it the Brownian sphere. It's the same thing. And also the Brownian disk, which is also an important model. Okay? And I will also spend some time at the second part, in the last part of the lecture, on non-compact models, which are the Brownian plane or the Brownian half plane, and also the infinite Brownian disk. Okay? These are really some kind of basic models, and I will explain also why they are the basic models. So something I want to emphasize is that the fact that the construction I'm going to give is also very helpful to understand relations between different models. Okay? In particular, relations between the Brownian sphere and the Brownian disk, or between the Brownian plane and the infinite Brownian disk. Okay, and let me also say that there are different constructions and different points of view on these models. They can also be viewed as quantum surfaces. And there is a lot of recent work, in particular by Scott Sheffield, Jason Miller, Ewan Green, and others. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay, so let me start with elementary things. I'm not assuming that you are familiar already with this theory. So the random graphs I'm going to consider are the planar maps. So what is a planar map? It's just a finite connected graph drawn on the two-dimensional sphere. So it's a proper embedding. Proper means that edges do not cross, of a finite connected graph on the sphere. The important thing is that it's considered up to orientation preserving homomorphisms of the sphere. Okay, so we are really interested only in the shape of the embedding, not in the precise details. I should have said, in fact, multi-graph instead of graph, because we allow self-loops and multiple edges. Okay, so here is an example of a planar map. Here, of course, it's drawn on the sheet of paper or on the slide, so, but you should imagine that it's drawn on the sphere. And so you have, of course, vertices, edges between certain pairs of vertices. And you have also faces. So faces, if you want, they are the regions bounded by the edges or the connected components of the complement of edges, okay? And we say that we have a p-angulation if each face is incident to exactly p edges. Yeah, I say p half edges because in fact, if you look at this face here, for instance, well, you see this edge, both sides of this edge are incident to the same face, okay, here and here. And so this edge will be counted twice in the degree of the face, okay? And in fact, we are going to be interested in degrees of faces. So the degrees is just a number of edges or half edges in the boundary of the face. And when each face is of degree 3, we say it's a triangulation. Degree 4, we say it's a quadrangulation. Okay, so this one here is in fact a quadrangulation. You can check that each face is of degree 4, including this one here. And also the external one. In fact, since we are on the sphere, there is no external face. It's just a face like the other ones. And there is a technical point, which is that we consider rooted planar maps, meaning that we have distinguished one edge, which is also oriented. Okay, so on this picture, it is this edge here. And the origin of this root edge is called the root vertex. Okay, so these are the basics about planar maps. And I can immediately state the first theorem of convergence to the Brownian sphere. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to look at the quadrangulation. It will always be rooted, but just a quadrangulation with a fixed number of faces chosen uniformly at random. Okay, so I pick Mn, just a uniformly distributed element of this set of quadrangulations with n faces. I should have said that this set is finite, okay, because of the identification we are making modulo homeomorphisms of the sphere, okay. So there are only finitely many possible shapes, finitely many quadrangulations with n faces, okay. So here is some notation for the vertex set of the quadrangulation for the graph distance on the vertex set. And I will also consider the uniform probability measure on the set of vertices. Okay, so the theorem, which I proved, and it was also obtained by Miermont with a different method, say that if I look at the vertex set as a metric space for the graph distance, but you see rescaled by this factor here, which is basically n to the power minus a quarter. The constants are not very important, okay? And I also look at this as a major metric space because I consider also the uniform probability measure on the vertex set. So this converges in distribution when the number of faces tends to infinity towards a limiting random compact metric space. I should say measure metric space. In fact, there is also a volume measure on this limiting space, which is called the Brownian sphere. Okay, and the convergence in the sense of Gromov-Hausdorff-Prohof, okay, which is a classical topology used to make sense of convergence of metric measure spaces. Okay, so I should immediately say that this can be generalized in many different ways, and you don't have to work with quadrangulations. You can work with much more general planar maps, for instance, with triangulations. But you always get up to a multiplicative constant on the distance. You always get the same limiting random metric space, okay? And you can, even if you want randomized edge length, okay, working with something different than the graph distance, you again always get the same limiting object. So I should have mentioned many names here because there are really lots of papers extending this theorem. Okay, so this is the Brownian sphere. Okay, so what can we say about this object? Well, here is a simulation, in fact, of a large triangulation drawn in space by Mathematica, but it should be drawn on the sphere with my definitions. But Mathematica draws it in space in such a way that well, the length of the different edges are not too different. So, but what you can see in this drawing that there is a kind of a very fractal structure. In fact, the limiting space is fractal in many senses. And in particular, you can prove that its Hausdorff dimension is equal to 4 almost surely. And you have, in fact, very precise result. You have a uniform control on the volume of balls. For the volume of a ball of radius r is always essentially of order r to the power 4. Okay. And okay, another result you can state is that despite it has order of dimension 4, it is still homeomorphic to the two sphere. So it's really a kind of sphere equipped with a very irregular metric so that the Hausdorff dimension is equal to 4. Okay, So this was for the Brownian sphere. Now I will introduce the Brownian disk. For that, I need to define quadrangulations with a boundary. So here is an example of a quadrangulation with a boundary of size 14. So what is the definition? Quadrangulation with a boundary, it's just again a rooted planar map, but which has the property that the root face, so what I call the root face is the face which is to the left of the root edge. So here, the root edge is here, so the face on the left, well, it corresponds to the external face on my picture, in fact. And this root face can have an arbitrary degree. It has to be even for simple reasons, but otherwise the degree can be arbitrary. Okay? Mm-hmm. But all other faces, all other than the root face, they have degree 4. Okay, so this one, you can check that all faces here, if my picture is correct, they have degree 4. Okay? So this is a quadrangulation with a boundary, and the degree of the root face is called the boundary size. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to explain how you can choose a quadrangulation with a boundary at random. And remember before I was choosing a quadrangulation with a fixed number of faces. Here what will be fixed will be the boundary size. Okay, so I'm going to define this M4P, which will be the set of all quadrangulations with a boundary of size 2P. Okay, and I use this notation for the number of faces of Q. Mm-hmm. Now, what is a Boltzmann quadrangulation with boundary size 2P? It's a random quadrangulation, so which will have a fixed boundary size 2P, and such that for any fixed Q quadrangulation with a boundary of size 2P, the probability is that this capital QP is equal to Q will be given by some constant, just a normalizing constant, times 12 to the power minus the number of faces. Okay. So you see that here the number of faces is not fixed. Okay, it's n. You can take any value, but the boundary size is fixed. Okay. So why is this 12 to the power minus n for the probability? The reason is that if you count how many quadrangulations with boundary size 2p have n faces, you have the following asymptotics for this number. It's basically 12 to the power n times n to the power minus 5 half. So 12 is the smallest constant that you can put here if you want to get a convergent series, if you want to be able to find a constant here so that, okay, you can normalize in order to get a probability measure. Okay, so this kind of critical value, and there are very good reasons for doing that. Okay, so this is a Boltzmann quadrangulation. And now you can state the result of convergence to the Brownian disk. And so this is a theorem due to Bettinelli and Mirmont, I think first, which is telling you that if you look at again, the vertex set of my Boltzmann quadrangulation, equipped with the graph distance rescaled basically by 1 over square root of p. And you can also look at the uniform probability measure on the vertex set. And here you normalize it by 1 over p squared, basically. Again, you get a convergence in distribution in Gromov-Hausdorff-Prohorov sense. And the limiting random compact metric measure space is called the free Brownian disk with perimeter 1. So why free? Because the volume is not fixed. Here the volume of the total volume of the limiting object will be random. Okay? So you can observe that the normalization is essentially the same as before, because this is telling you that the volume, the number of faces, if you want, for the Boltzmann quadrangulation is of order p squared. And you also normalize by 1 over p squared to the power a quarter. Okay? So it's essentially the same normalization by 1 over the volume to the power a quarter, as we had before. So I mentioned here that there are also extensions of these results by Gwynn and Miller, and a recent paper by Albank, Holden, and Sun. Okay, so here you have perimeter 1, but by scaling you can have perimeter R if you want. And you can also condition on the volume. This was done, in fact, initially by Bettinelli and Mirmont. You can define the limiting object with a fixed volume equals to V. Okay. So what are the properties of the Brownian disk? Well, again, it's homeomorphic to the closed unit disk, as we had before the Brownian sphere homeomorphic to the sphere. So you can make sense of the boundary of the Brownian disk, of course. And as I already said, you can view also a Brownian disk like the Brownian sphere as a Liouville quantum gravity surfaces. And there are many papers about this, but I have no time to discuss that. Now, what I want to stress is that, in fact, you can find many special subsets of the Brownian sphere that are Brownian disks. Okay? So these are really two very closely related objects. So I will give only one example. So this is a kind of representation of the Brownian sphere. It's a kind of cactus representation. So this is supposed to be the Brownian sphere, this cactus. And we will see that there is a distinguished point. Okay, I will introduce it later, but let me draw it immediately on the picture. This X star. It's a particular point, but it does not play any special role. It's a typical point. You can replace it by a point chosen uniformly at random according to the volume measure. But here, what I've represented, I have represented the vertical coordinate corresponds to the distance from this distinguished point X star. Okay. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to look at the ball of radius h centered at this X star. Okay, this means that I cut my cactus here at height h. And of course, as you can see on this picture, the complement is not going to be connected. There are many connected components. In fact, typically there are infinitely many such components. So you can look at the connected components. You can equip each such connected component with its intrinsic metric, meaning that if I pick 2 points in one component, I look at the smallest length of a path connecting them, but I have to restrict myself, of course, to paths that stay in the component. I'm not allowed to consider a path that does something like this, that goes outside the component. So that's the definition of the intrinsic metric. And the theorem says that, well, firstly, you can define a kind of boundary size for each component. So how do you do that? You look at the volume of the set of points in the component whose distance from the boundary is less than epsilon. You normalize this by 1 over epsilon square, and in the limit, you get something which is the boundary size. It's a way of measuring this length of the boundary. Okay? And what you can prove is that if you condition on the boundary sizes and on the volumes of the components, well, you get, in fact, independent Brownian disks with prescribed volumes and perimeters. Okay. So that's one connection between the Brownian disk and the Brownian sphere, and there are others, but maybe I will not discuss them now. Okay, so in the second part of the lecture, I will describe how we can construct these random metric spaces using random trees equipped with labels. So very important basic ingredient is the Brownian tree, which is essentially Aldous CRT, continuum random tree introduced by Aldous. Here I prefer to view this object as a tree coded by a Brownian excursion. And of course I could consider different measures here on Brownian excursions. I choose for this lecture to consider the Ito excursion measure. Okay, so it's kind of, if you want, a free excursion without a fixed length, with a random length. Okay, so but I could condition the duration of the excursion to be equal to 1, for instance, to get exactly the CRT. But okay, so essentially you start from a Brownian excursion. This is this blue thing here, and you're going to consider the area below the curve here, below the excursion, and you're going to look at all horizontal chords that you can draw. I have drawn here a few of them below this curve, below the excursion. Okay, and the informal idea of the excursion, of the construction of the Brownian tree, is to identify all points belonging to one of these chords, to the single point. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay, so if you do this identification, well, you can check that you get something which looks like a tree, which is in fact an R tree. Okay, so if you don't like this informal presentation, here is the mathematical one. You're going to construct an equivalence relation on the interval 0 sigma, the duration interval of the excursion. You say that S and T are equivalent if the excursion takes the same value at S and at T, and is equal, and this value is also equal to the minimum of the excursion between S and T. Okay, so between S and T, E takes larger values than at S or at T. So this is meaning that S and T correspond, in fact, to the ends of a chord drawn below the excursion. So you have defined this equivalence relation, and what you do now, you take the quotient space of the interval 0 sigma for this equivalence relation, and we equip it with this metric. So the distance between S and T will be E of S plus E of T minus twice the minimum between S and T of the excursion. And in this way, you get the Brownian tree. Okay, so this is just to remind you of the definition here. And so this quotient space now turns out to be a compact R tree. What does it mean, an R tree? It means that it is, okay, here, a compact metric space that if you pick any 2 points, A and B, there is a unique arc, a unique path here, blue path, going from A to B up to reparametrization, provided, of course, it's an injective path. Okay, so some important things about the Brownian tree, which I'm going to consider. Of course, you have a canonical projection from the interval 0 sigma onto the quotient space. You decide to root the tree at well, the projection, the equivalence class of 0, if you want. So the point which is at the bottom of the tree. And of course, you can define a volume measure, the push forward of Lebesgue measure under this projection. And something which is very important, which I mentioned here, is the fact that you have also a cyclic ordering on your tree. Okay, so what does it mean? You can move around the tree in the way I try to suggest here. Okay, and this is cyclic ordering is just given again by the projection PE. Okay, so it makes sense if you are at a point A, at a vertex A of the tree, well, to move around the tree until you reach another vertex B. Okay, to explore the tree clockwise if you want. So that's going to be very useful, and this is done very simply using this canonical projection. So now I can introduce the Brownian motion indexed by the Brownian tree. So this is the other important object. So informally, you condition on the Brownian tree, and it's just the usual definition of Brownian motion. Brownian motion is indexed by a tree now, but basically it's the same as the usual Brownian motion indexed by the half line. It's a centered Gaussian process. You prescribe its value at the root to be 0, and you require that the variance of the increment of Z between A and B to be equal to the distance from A to B in the tree. Okay. There is this technical difficulty, but the fact that it's a random process indexed by a random set, but you can overcome this difficulty very easily by, you can also view Z as indexed by the interval 0 sigma. Okay. You can prove that Z has continuous sample paths. And the way I will see Z is that as a Brownian label, as Brownian labels assigned to the points of the tree. Okay. ZA will be the label of A. And the idea is that when you move along a line segment of the tree, the labels evolve like linear Brownian motion. Okay. So, of course, I have not time to comment on that, but there are many motivations other than random geometry to study these objects. Okay, but let me be, I don't want to say more about that. Okay, maybe I want to explain this on these pictures, which are of course very schematic, which are not realistic, but still I think that they help to understand what's going on. So you have first the tree, which is here, this Brownian tree, red tree. And remember, you also have, I'm not going to use it immediately, but later I'm going to use this clockwise order on the tree. And then you assign labels, well, to every point in the tree, you assign a label, ZA. And if you look, okay, on this picture on the left, well, the vertical coordinate corresponds to the distance between the root and point A of the tree. And the horizontal coordinate corresponds to the label of this point A. Okay. And here, in some sense, well, I've tried to represent all labels, okay, in this way. Okay. And I say that they form a tree of Brownian path with genealogy prescribed by the Brownian tree, which is on the right part here of the slide. Okay. So what do I mean by that? Okay, well, suppose I pick one point here, A1 in the tree, and the value of the label is the A1 will be here. And if I consider the values of the labels on the line segment, if you want, on the geodesic path here between the root of the tree and the point A1, this black segment here, well, along this black segment, well, your label should evolve like a linear Brownian motion. Okay, you have this linear Brownian motion. Of course, here it's drawn with time written vertically, because here time corresponds to the distance from the root. Okay, but otherwise, this black curve is just a linear Brownian motion on the time interval between 0 and this distance from the root to A1. Okay, if you pick another point A2, okay, similarly, to get the value of the label of A2, you follow the value of labels along the geodesic path from the root to A2. Well, this green path now, up to this point. And of course, it's a green path is the same as the black path I had for A1, up to this point, which is the last common point to the geodesic segments from the root to A1 and A2. Okay, so that's the idea of why you get this tree of Brownian paths. Okay, now, of course, sorry, it was a bit long, but I can explain now the construction of the Brownian sphere. So this is to remind you the notation. You have first the Brownian tree, and then given the Brownian tree, you have Brownian motion indexed by the tree. So you introduce this trench function, which is d0 of AB equals to the sum of the label of A and the label of B, minus twice the minimal label between A and B. Okay, so what do I mean by between A and B? This is exactly what I told you before. If you pick 2 points, you can go from A to B around the tree like this, but you can also choose to go from A to B in counterclockwise order, okay? So there are 2 ways of going from A to B around the tree, clockwise or counterclockwise. So for each of these 2 ways, you compute the minimal label that you get, okay? And you take the maximum here of these minimum labels, okay? So this is what I subtract here. Okay, so, okay, it's a bit strange. I could explain this by coming back to the discrete picture and to the quadrangulations or triangulations, but it would be too long. And you just have to accept that. What I define then is this capital D. Well, this D0 is quite nice, but it's symmetric. The symmetric function of A and B, of course, but it does not satisfy the triangle inequality. So what I consider the maximal symmetric function on the tree product itself that is bounded above by this one and satisfies the triangle inequality. So this is D0, this is capital D, sorry. Then I introduce an equivalence relation saying that A is equivalent to B if capital D of AB is equal to 0. One can prove that this is equivalent, in fact, to 0 of AB equals 0, but this is not an obvious fact. And the free Brownian sphere is just obtained by taking the quotient space of the Brownian tree for this equivalence relation. So you should think that we already obtained the Brownian tree as a quotient space, but now we are doing one more quotient space, a quotienting with respect to this equivalence relation. Okay. And of course, we equip it with a distance induced by this capital D. Okay. So it's a free Brownian sphere here because the total volume is not fixed. It's equal to this sigma, in fact, which was the length of the excursion, but you make condition on sigma equals 1 to get the standard Brownian sphere. Okay. So this is a rough summary of what we have been doing, starting from the Brownian tree with labels. We identify 2 vertices. Well, maybe I should come back to the previous slide if I can do it. Okay. This D0 of AB is equal to 0 only if all 3 quantities that appear here are equal. Okay. It's clear because both ZA and ZB are larger than this quantity here. Okay. So for D0 of AB to be equal to 0, we must have ZA equals ZB equals this maximum. Okay. So this means that we identify 2 points that have the same label, and if you can go from the first one to the second one around the tree, beating only points with greater label. Okay. So now, a nice feature of this construction is the fact that you also get some very useful information about distances. If you think of the point with minimal label, this I call it here X star on the tree, then the labels give you basically the distances from this point with the minimal labels. Okay, d of x star a is equal to ZA minus ZX star. You just have to subtract the label of x star. Okay, and that's going to be important. If you come back to the result I mentioned before about connected components of the complement of a ball, and you see from this result, you can check that they correspond in the tree construction to excursion of the above level. Okay, so in some sense, I told you that these connected components were Brownian disks. Okay, a Brownian disk will correspond in some sense to excursions of the process of labels. So this motivates the third part of the lecture. Before that, I should mention, okay, I have no time to discuss that, but there are now different approaches to the Brownian sphere, in particular from the work of Miller and Sheffield, and there has been simplifications, in fact, in this approach due to the recent work of many people, including here I mentioned the recent paper of Gwynn and Miller. Okay, but maybe I should proceed. Okay, so maybe the third part, I will briefly discuss what I mean by excursions of Brownian motion indexed by the Brownian tree. Okay, so this is the same picture as before. I have this Brownian tree here, the tree of paths corresponding to the Brownian tree. Okay, and now I'm going to look at excursions in the usual way. Here I look only at excursion from 0. I could look at excursions from another point. It means that I look at the connected components of the set of points in the tree which have a non-zero label. It's exactly similar to the classical excursion theory for linear Brownian motion. Okay? But here, of course, if my because my indexing set is a tree, the connected components are also trees. So I've drawn a few of them here, the red path. So you should imagine, for instance, that this red connected component corresponds in my tree of paths to this excursion here, which I have circled in dashed red lines here. Okay. Okay. So each excursion can be viewed as a connected component, which is itself an R tree equipped with labels. Okay, simply the label Z restricted to the component. Okay. And it turns out that one can define also the boundary size of excursion. It's really while counting essentially how many points with label 0 you will have in the excursion. Okay, you can get it again by an approximation in a similar way to what I had before. And this theorem, which I proved with Céline Abraham, says that, well, you have something similar to the classical series, saying that if you condition on the boundary sizes, the excursions become independent, and you can characterize their distribution in terms of a kind of excursion measure, capital M here, well, conditioned on the boundary size. Okay, so it's very similar to the classical excursion theory. And well, you can also, of course, distinguish the positive part and the negative part of this excursion measure. So maybe I don't spend too much time about that. It's better to understand the picture that we have here. If we look at the positive excursion, this measure M plus, you again have a tree of non-negative Brownian paths. So there is an underlying R tree which codes the genealogy. But now these are Brownian paths, but conditioned in some sense to stay non-negative. They all start on 0, they stay positive for some time. Maybe they never come back to 0, but maybe they do come back to 0. And if they come back to 0, they are immediately frozen. They are stopped immediately. Okay, okay, so this represents, if you want, an excursion of my tree value, my tree indexed Brownian motion. Okay, and informally, this boundary size capital sigma counts how many red points you have on this picture. What is nice is that you can have a lot of explicit formulas under this excursion measure, but maybe I don't spend too much time about that. So now I come to the construction of Brownian disks. Okay, so well, this is the picture I had before. So I consider my excursion measure for the tree indexed Brownian motion, conditioned on the fact that you have a given boundary size, is capital sigma here. So under this measure, you have an R tree coding the genealogy, and you have labels. So labels form a tree of non-negative paths here. Not really Brownian paths, because there is something strange that happens here. They have to stay positive for a while, but okay. And also, again, you have this cyclic order structure on the tree, which allows one to define, as before, intervals on the tree. The interval between A and B is all points that you get if you go from A to B around the tree. Okay. Now you say, well, I'm going to work with an excursion, and I'm going to play the same game as for the Brownian sphere. Okay. So to define this D0 of AB, just the same definition as before, the sum of the labels of A and B minus twice the minimal label between A and B, okay? But if I try to do the same as before for the Brownian sphere, I will need to identify A and B if D0 of AB equals 0. But if you think of this, all the boundary points here, the points corresponding to all points with label 0, are going to be identified, because in that case, you will have, of course, these two will be 0, but this one also will be 0, okay? So, but you don't want to do that, because all these circle in red points here, they will correspond to the boundary of the disk. Okay? So you have to do something slightly more complicated. So what you do, you keep this D0, but you restrict it in some sense to points which have a positive label. So this T0 is the complement of the boundary in the tree. The boundary is just a set of points with 0 label. And you define this delta 0 to be D0 of AB if you can go from A to B around the tree, not visiting a point with 0 label. So this means that one of these two minima will be positive. Okay? You will not encounter a point with positive label. Otherwise, you put it equal to infinity. Okay? And of course, sometimes this delta 0 takes the value plus infinity, but you don't care about that, because then you introduce this capital delta. It's the same as before. It's the largest symmetric function of A and B that satisfies the triangle inequality and is bounded above by delta 0. So you can, if you want, get it with this formula, okay? But it's really the same thing I did before for the Brownian sphere. Oops, I was too fast. And now the theorem tells you that, again, while this delta of AB is a priori defined only for points with positive label, but you can extend it continuously to all points of the tree. You get a pseudometric. If you take the quotient space of the tree for this pseudometric, equipped with a distance induced by delta, you get the free Brownian disk with perimeter R. Okay, and again, you have a canonical projection, if you want, from the tree onto the Brownian disk, and in this projection, but the boundary of the Brownian disk corresponds to the boundary of the tree, the set of points with 0 labels. And in fact, what I say here is that the label corresponds now to the distance from a point to the boundary. Okay? So you have the same interpretation as before, and something which is nice in this construction is that you get a very natural construction of the uniform measure on the boundary using the same kind of approximation that I mentioned before. In fact, this uniform measure had already been constructed by Bettini and Mirmont, but it was not so clear that it was the same definition as this one. And in fact, this can be proved. Okay? And this is really useful. This was used in a recent paper by Gwynn and Miller in particular. Okay, so, well, I think I do not have so much time. Maybe I can very quickly say a few words about this part 5. It's just okay. I'm going to explain that you can make a lot of explicit calculations on these objects, which I think is interesting. And you can get nice stochastic processes in different ways studying these objects. So here, what I'm studying what you get. You start from okay, here I've drawn a Brownian disk. I could have drawn, in fact, a Brownian sphere also, would have a similar result. But here I've drawn a Brownian disk, in sort of cactus-like representation again. But the height now corresponds here on my picture to the distance from a point of the disk to the boundary. Okay, so the vertical coordinate is the distance from the boundary. Okay. And again, I'm going to do what I did before for the Brownian sphere. I'm going to cut my cactus at a given height. Okay. So this means that I look at connected components of the set of points with height, with distance from the boundary greater than h. Okay. And again, for each of these components, you can define its boundary size. It's very similar to the result I mentioned before for the Brilliant sphere. And also you have this very similar result saying that if you condition on the boundary size, you get these connected components are independent free Brilliant disks. Okay. So here you get free Brilliant disks because I started from the free object here also. When I had a similar result for the Brilliant sphere, I had to condition also on the volumes, but essentially it's the same result, okay? Mm-hmm. And well, then the natural question you may ask is, what happens when you vary H? How does this collection of boundary sizes evolve, okay? And so I introduced this capital X of H. This is the ranked collection of boundary sizes of the connected components of the set of points with height greater than H, okay? And while the previous result, this theorem I mentioned, suggests that you have a kind of Markov property and branching property for this process of ranked height, okay? Ranked boundary sizes, sorry. And okay, I had a slide to describe what is the gross fragmentation process, but maybe I will skip this. It's going to be too long. And the result we can state is a joint work with Armory Era. It's published recently. It's telling you that you can explicitly describe the distribution when H varies of this process of the collection of boundary sizes of the connected components above level H. Okay. And you get it as a gross fragmentation process, and it's completely characterized by something which is called the Eve particle mass process. And here I've tried to give you the distribution of this mass process as a time change of the exponential of a Levy process. But maybe I do not explain that in detail. I just want to say, because it's important, that this theorem is very closely related to an earlier work of Bertrand Curien and Kurt Chemsky, something similar, but in the discrete setting for triangulations. Okay, I wanted to have still some time, I still have 15 minutes, I think, to speak about the more recent results about non-compact models. Okay, so I will discuss 3 non-compact models and will briefly present them. And the first one is the Brownian plane. So this was introduced, in fact, a few years ago in a joint work with Curien. And how do you get the Brownian plane? Well, you play the same game as before. You see, you start with a uniformly distributed quadrangulation with n faces. You look at the vertex, the graph distance. But if you remember, maybe you forgot it, but in what I did before to get the Brownian sphere, I was scaling the graph distance with a factor which was n to the power -1/4. Here I do a different scaling. I scale it to a scaling by multiplying the graph distance by a constant an. N is the number of faces, okay? An tending to 0, of course, but at a rate slower than n to the power -1/4, okay? So what's going to happen? Because we know that n to the power -1/4 is the proper scaling if we want to get a compact limit. Here in the limit, we will get a non-compact space, okay? Because our scaling is too slow, okay? And in fact, we get a convergence in the local Gromov-Hausdorff sense. So this local Gromov-Hausdorff convergence means that we have to deal with pointed spaces. So here, the space is pointed as the root vertex, and in the limit, we will also have a distinguished point. And so the local Gromov-Hausdorff sense means that if you look at the ball of radius r in this space, it will converge in the Gromov-Hausdorff sense to the ball of radius r in the limiting space, okay? So the limit, as I said, is non-compact, and this is what we call the Brownian plane, okay? Well, we can get, in fact, many other approximations of the Brownian plane. It's also the scaling limit of the UIPQ or of the UIPT, and you can also get other approximations. I just want to say that now the Brownian plane is homeomorphic to the usual plane. Okay, how do you construct the infinite Brownian disk? Okay, so now you have to start with quadrangulations with a boundary of size 2p as before, but now I'm going to fix also the number of internal faces, okay? So I use this notation QPN for a uniformly distributed element of this set of quadrangulations with a boundary of size 2p and n internal faces. Okay. And now if I'm going to look at n as a function of p. And if you remember well, when we had an approximation of the Brownian disk, we basically the number of faces for the Boltzmann quadrangulation with a boundary was of order p square. But here I'm going to force the number of faces to be greater than p square. So I pick a sequence np such that np over p square tends to infinity. Okay, so I look at this quadrangulation with boundary size 2p and np faces, but more faces if you want than I would have if I wanted to get the Brownian disk. Okay, I keep the same normalization as before. It's basically 1 over square root of p for the graph distance. And now I get again a non-compact limit in the local Gromov-Redov sense. And this is infinite Brownian disk with perimeter 1. Okay? And you can prove that it is homeomorphic to the complement of the European unit disk of the plane. Okay? Okay, now I come to the third one, and then I will finish. I will say something else. The third one is a Brownian half plane. Well, you can get it in many different ways. I just give here one way. You start again with a quadrangulation with a boundary of size 2p and n internal faces. I do the same as just before. Number of faces will be larger in comparison with p square, with the size of the boundary. But now I rescale the distance. If you compare with the previous theorem, this was basically 1 over square root of p. Now I rescale the distance by something which goes to 0, but at a slower rate than 1 over square root of p. Okay, and then, okay, I get now this limit, which is the Brownian half plane, and which is homeomorphic to the usual half plane. Okay. So I should mention that, okay, you may say, well, there are only 3 examples of non-compact limits, but there is a nice paper by Bohr, Mirmont, and Ray, which just appeared in Another Probability, which classifies all possible scaling limits of quadrangulations with a boundary. And really, the Brownian plane, the Brownian half plane, and the infinite Brownian disk are the basic objects that you get, basic building blocks, even if there are certain variants of these objects that appear, but these are really the basic limits you can get. Okay. So now, from the next slide, I want to explain how you can construct these non-compact models. And this is going to be very similar to what I explained before. I think I spent a lot of time explaining to you before the constructions of the Brownian disk and the Brownian sphere, but now it will be easier to understand what happens for the non-compact objects. Okay. So you need to consider now the infinite Brownian tree. This was also considered by David Aldous in his work on the CRT. Okay. So how do you get this infinite Brownian tree? Well, you first need an infinite spine. Okay, so it should be the fat line here in my picture here, because it's isometric to the positive half line. And you are going to graft subtrees on both sides. It will be important again to have this order structure to distinguish the left side and the right side of the spine. Okay. So if you want to get the subtrees that branch off the left side, well, you're going to consider Brownian trees. So meaning that, well, it's the same as before. You can get these Brownian trees as trees coded by Brownian excursions. So you can look at the Poisson point measure, this object here. It's on R plus times the space of excursions. With intensity, well, the factor 2 is not important. Lebesgue measure for H, and here for the excursion, the Ito measure I had before. Okay. So again, this Ito measure is an infinite measure. Maybe I did not emphasize that before, but it's n plus infinite. And for each atom of this point measure, for each I belonging to I, you graft the tree coded by the excursion, so one of tree like this, at height hi of the spine. Okay, and you play the same game with an independent Poisson point measure for the right side. Okay, and of course, this is a very schematic figure. You should have infinitely many such Brownian trees grafted even on a compact segment of the spine. Okay, so we'll have many more trees, of course. But the union forms again an artery, but it's now a non-compact artery. Well, I'm going to introduce labels now on this non-compact arteries. So that's a bit different from what I did before. I have the labels of the spine. So this picture is, well, it's not a very good picture, but I hope it will give you an idea. So the labels along the spine are going to evolve like a three-dimensional Bessel process starting from 0. So the fat curve here is supposed to give you an idea of the process of labels along the spine. Okay. And now these are all these subtrees which I supposed to give you an idea of the labels of the subtrees that are grafted on the spine. Okay, and the label for a given subtree is say TE, tree coded by excursion E, if you want. The labels will be given by Brownian motion indexed by TE. Okay, just it's just the same as I had before. Okay, I explained to you before, except that you don't start from 0. Of course, you start from the label corresponding to the point of the spine where the subtree is grafted. Okay, and so on this picture, the vertical coordinate corresponds to labels. The horizontal coordinate corresponds to nothing, just a way of drawing the picture, but don't think of the horizontal coordinate. So there is something very important in my picture, is that if I do this exactly, you see, of course, the labels along the spine are positive because it's a Bessel process. But for the subtrees, there is no reason why the labels should stay positive. Okay. So here, what I have done, in fact, I have truncated in such a way that the labels stay non-negative. So this is what I say below. It's a key point. The subtrees are truncated at points where the label vanishes. Okay. So so I have this picture. So the labels may vanish, but then I freeze everything. I cut the tree at this point. Okay. So maybe the label has vanished here. Oh, okay. I cut the branches here. Okay. And of course, the subtrees, so I'm cheating a little bit, the subtrees are no longer Brownian trees because I have performed this truncation operation. But still, you can make sense of the object, of course. Okay, so now I say that from this picture, you can construct all the non-compact models. Okay, so the point is that you can define a quantity Z that measures, well, how many points have labeled 0. Okay, it's very similar to what we had for the Brownian disk before. You can use this using what's called exit measures for the Brownian snake or things like that. But there's a way of counting all these blue points here. And now you're going to do different conditionings, okay? You just do the same construction as for the Brownian disk, okay? What I mean is that you, again, in your tree, you are going to identify 2 points if they have the same label and if between them labels stay larger. And you have to pay special attention also to the boundary, okay? But maybe I don't give so many details about that. But basically, you just imitate the construction. You get the Brownian plane if you condition on this Z equal to 0. The infinite Brownian disk with perimeter A, if you condition on Z equals A. And the Brownian half plane, if you condition on then Z equals infinity. In fact, this last conditioning is not needed because if I look at this object without doing anything, you have Z equals infinity almost surely. And then you may say, well, you have something which is equal to infinity almost surely. You want to condition it to be equal to 0 or to be equal to a fixed value A. How do you do that? Okay. But there is a way of doing that, which is very natural. The way is that you cut your tree at a certain height of the spine. If you want to work with a finite tree, then the conditioning makes sense. Then you pass to the limit. Okay, so it makes perfectly sense, these conditionings, and you get the 3 non-compact models. Okay, I just have 4 or 5 minutes. So this is done. This is joint work with Armand Riera, and this is really a kind of unifying method for constructing all the compact and non-compact models. It's already really essentially always working with the same objects. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. So what can you do with this construction? Okay. So, well, what I want to say a few more words about the Brownian plane. So to get the Brownian plane, you condition on Z equals 0. So this means, in fact, that you have no subtree branching of the spine that hit label 0. Okay? So all labels stay positive on the subtrees. Okay? And in fact, it changes the behavior of the labels along the spine. Now what you get along the spine is a 9-dimensional Bessel process instead of a 3-dimensional process. Okay? And of course, the subtrees also you have a special conditioning. Okay? Now in this picture, now the labels will correspond to the distances from distinguished point X star, which is the bottom of the spine here, this point here. And I do not explain details, but if you apply this similar construction to the infinite Brownian disk or to the Brownian half plane, labels will correspond to distances from the boundary. So now I'm going to apply this to hulls in the Brownian plane. Okay, so what is the hull of radius r in the Brownian plane? You look at the ball of radius r in the Brownian plane in the same way as I explained before. The complement of the ball is not connected. You have an unbounded connected component, but you have also many bounded connected components here. And what you do, you just add to the ball all the bounded connected components, okay? And you get the hull, which I denote here by B bullet of R, B dot of R, okay? Informally, you fill in all the bounded holes in the ball, okay? Now, okay, I come back to my construction of the Brownian plane. I remind you that this vertical coordinate here corresponds to the distance from this R star here, this X star, which was the distinguished point of the Brownian plane. And suppose you want to look at the hull, or rather the complement of the hull. Well, you can check that the complement of the hull corresponds to, in fact, cutting the tree here at level R. And what do I mean by that? I look at the last point with label R on the spine, okay? And I look at the part of the spine below this, above this point. And I keep only the subtrees that branch off this part of the spine, but I truncate them as I was doing before at level R. So I get a picture like this if you want, okay? And of course, this resembles a lot what I explained before, the spine representation of the infinite Brownian disk. It was here, okay? It was just looking at this object, conditioning on the number of the quantity of blue points equal to A. And so, but in a sense, it's still different because before that, I had a 3-dimensional Bessel process. Here, I have a 9-dimensional Bessel process after its last visit of a label of a point R. And this is a rather complicated process, but there is a kind of miracle, which is when if you condition of the number of boundary points here, it will have the same effect as if you had a 3-dimensional Bessel process, okay? So this is something that surprised us, but there is something a bit mysterious. But essentially you can get now the fact that if you look at the complement of the hull, this is the result I wanted to state, if you condition on the boundary size of the hull, which can be defined in a way very similar to before, the hull and its complement are independent random metric spaces. So I should say that you have to equip them with their intrinsic metrics. And moreover, the complement of the hull is an infinite Brownian disk, okay? With, of course, a perimeter, which is the boundary size of the hull. Okay, so this kind of spatial Markov property in the Brownian plane, and you can think of other related results. Why is this result useful? It's giving you really a lot of independence in the Brownian plane. Okay, so this is my last slide. Here, what I have drawn, if you want, in different colors, the hulls of different radii, R1 smaller than R2, smaller than 80, and more precisely, the annuli that you get if you look at for instance, the hull of radius R2 minus hull of radius R1. This is a pink annulus. This is the blue annulus, another one, the green one, etc. And all these annuli are going to independent if you condition on their boundary sizes. And I wanted the next to state the last theorem, which is not due to me, it's a work of Armoriera, and all the results I mentioned before were in fact motivated by the proof of this result, which is a nice isometric result in the Brownian plane. Okay, so essentially you look at domains. Okay, so I look at Jordan domains containing the distinguished point in the Brownian plane, and I want to say that the boundary size of such a domain is at least equal to its volume to the power a quarter. Okay, and this theorem tells you very precisely that this is correct. You have to introduce logarithmic correction if you want this to be correct, but you know exactly which function of the logarithm here is critical, so that you can bound the boundary size by the volume to the power a quarter times this function of the logarithm of the volume. Okay, and you have this integral text in terms of the function f, which tells you when it works and when it does not work. Okay, sorry, I was a bit long. Thank you for your attention.
Great.
If you have any question, of course, I'm happy to reply.
Thank you.
First, should we clap for a very beautiful talk?
Great.
Are there questions? Unmute yourself and ask, or ask in the chat.
Oh, there's a question there, I think. No?
I'll start with one question. You had this result that if you look at this Brownian cactus, this cactus thing, and then you look at these disks of the places where the distance is bigger than a certain amount are independent Brownian disks. Mm-hmm. Is it like a simpler fact that they're independent, or do you have to sort of construct the law to see this?
In my approach, independence is really related to the independence result I mentioned before for the excursions of my tree-indexed Brownian motion above our level. I said that if you condition on the boundary sizes, the excursion become independent. And really in the construction I explained for the Brownian disk, and it also works for the Brownian sphere, when you cut a cactus at a given height, the components are coded by different excursions of my tree-indexed Brownian motion. So you really get independence in this way. Probably there are different ways of getting it, but if you think of other constructions of, I mentioned quantum surfaces, and also if you think of this Gaussian free field approach to these objects, probably you can also view the independence there. Mm-hmm.
Thanks. Are there other questions? Well, if not, I guess we can thank Jean-Francois again.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Now stop the recording.